When Scott Cawthon announced that a new book series would be joining the Five Nights at Freddy's material, the people were excited. This collection of short stories in a series form would not only help with lore as promised, but also served to be generally great stories. And that is why, today, I'm going to be ranking them all in a tier list form. So, hello everyone, I am Inkyink, and today we are here on the Tier Maker website. And right here, as you can see, we've got all the stories from the currently existing Fazbear Frights books, which would be Into the Pit, Fetch, 1:35 a.m., Step Closer, and Bunny Call. Now, I've recently finished reading all of them for the first time, and with Blackbird, The Cliffs, and the other stuff coming along the way next year-ish, I thought now would be a good time to rank each story, because I have a lot of interesting opinions about these stories. Now, they're based on a few criteria. We've got characters, story, relevance to FNaF in general, horror, and the amount of thinking you have to do to actually understand what's going on, because there are a few confusing ones. So to start, I think I'm going to be ranking all of the first stories. And these tend to be sort of like introductory ones that sort of bring you into the book. They're what the title of the book is. But before we get into that, if you enjoy this video, please like it. I would really appreciate that. Share it with people. Comment what you guys think, what your opinions on this are. And yes, this is my opinion, so I'm not trying to make this an objective fact. But with that all said, I think a great place to start would be the first story, Into the Pit. Now, Into the Pit was a very interesting start for the books, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. We've got Oswald. He's, as far as characters go, he's a bit more on the basic side compared to some of the other protagonists we have later on. He's a kid who is bored of his life, and he's drawn to the animatronic stuff. Like, literally, he subconsciously draws them. So he goes to this pizza place. Also, yeah, I am going to be going over spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, read the books and come back. You can, this video will be here, so don't feel pressured to watch if you don't want spoilers. So he goes there, and he goes into this ball pit, and that transports him into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985, where some shenanigans go down. He ends up seeing Spring Bonnie, but it's not really Spring Bonnie, and he shows him some dead kids. Then he becomes his dad. His dad switches places with the Spring Bonnie, and nobody else notices except the cat, and it was just a very weird thing. They have a final showdown back at the ball pit, and the Spring Bonnie gets himself hanged. It's overall a very confusing story. As far as characters, we've got, like, Oswald's dad, you got some of the 1985 kids, but none of them really stand out as characters, so it is going to rank lower in that regard. Relevance to FNaF is a very high one, because this is, we basically went to Freddy's in this book, so that is definitely important. It's very confusing, which lowers it on that, and as far as story, I'm not sure. As for how I generally enjoyed this one, I think I'm gonna give it a solid B tier. Do I want to do that? Do I want to do that? I'm not sure. It's gonna be B or C. This one wasn't very... I think it's gonna be a low B when it comes down to it. But that is sort of the standard right now. We've got Into the Pit. Our next first story was Fetch. Now, I generally chose to do all the first stories first because they're kind of mid-tier, but Fetch is absolutely the exception. I'm not even going to waste any time. Fetch is going to be an A or an S tier. This was a good story. You got Greg, you got the other guys that I forget. I read this like maybe a month ago. You got the other guys. They form a nice little trio of characters. You got the typical high school crush. I mean, she's not really typical, but basically, Greg is studying like human influence on things, and he finds Fetch, which is a robotic dog. I'm gonna put it in A tier for now. He finds this robotic dog. The robotic dog sort of like hacks into his phone almost and starts getting him things that he wanted, but like preemptively. He like mentions chocolate. The dog orders chocolate. It was pretty crazy. And eventually, it starts getting out of hand. The dog brings him a dead dog that was bothering him, a finger, and eventually it's implied that he kills the crush. What was her name? It was a K name. Anyway, sorry about that. That's a little unprofessional. But this is just a video anyway, so basically, Fetch had very good pacing. It had very great characters, a good story. It felt like it could be a short film, and it had just enough relevance to Freddy's in general to keep it connected, but not enough that it's just like a lore dump. It's like a new thing, but it's still connected, and it actually gets tied in with stuff later. Now, let's see. So yeah, it's gonna be an A tier for all of that stuff. As far as horror, yeah, I forgot to touch on horror for Into the Pit as well. Into the Pit, not very scary. It's kind of the typical FNaF stuff. Fetch was a little bit more, because you've got some pretty disturbing stuff with the stuff that he brings Greg, as he requested. It's very reminiscent of the short story The Monkey's Paw, where you wish for something, but it comes to you in kind of the worst way possible. You wish for a lot of money, your son dies, and you get compensation from his company. Stuff like that. That's kind of what Fetch was. And overall, it was a very good story. Next up, we've got 1:35 a.m. Now, this one's interesting. I like it, and I like most of them. But let's see. Does it add up? I think we've got some good characters. We've got Delilah. She's kind of down on her luck. Kind of just going through life. She's recovering from like a divorce. She's not in the best place mentally. And then she gets this doll from a garage sale. She realizes that it's a terrible alarm clock. It wakes her up at 1:35 a.m. instead of 1:35 p.m. And she throws it out, but then it starts tormenting her. Like, she gets all these hallucinations of it. She loses her job eventually, and she tries to go to her friends for it, but like they can't really help, because what do you do here? There's nothing you can really do if you're the only one who can see this thing. So she ends up like losing her mind. She can't sleep because it's like keeping her awake, and she eventually just crawls into a vent, and the vagueness is a little there, but it's implied that she kind of just died in the vent. Which can tie back to the sister location line, where it's like someone was found in this vent once and they were dead.
So, funny story, a dead body was found in this vent once. Okay, so not that funny, but it's a story.
Anyway, 1:35 a.m. Pretty good story. Actually, good characters. Good characters. Basically, Delilah is the mostly focused on character. There are some others, but they aren't very compelling in my opinion. But Delilah does kind of carry the story. As far as story, it has some pacing issues. It felt a little slow at some points. It took me a while to get through it. Whereas compared to other stories where I'm really interested, I can do it in like maybe an hour and a half, maybe. But relevance to FNaF, there's actually not much there. This story is about a very minor doll in the original book trilogy, the Ella doll. But aside from that, and maybe having to do with the illusion discs, there isn't actually much to do with FNaF here. And the horror, basically non-existent. yeah, it's kind of spooky if a doll is kind of messing with your head, keeping you up at night, but nothing really crazy happens. So, because of that, it would be a C tier. However, because I think it has a pretty good main character, it's going to be a lower B tier than Into the Pit. Next up, we've got Step Closer, and this one's an interesting one because this helped confirm Mike Bro instead of Mike Victim. Some would argue with that, but it's not really a battle that they can really win at this point. I had pretty high expectations going into this one, and I can't say I was that satisfied with it. It was another one of the ones that took me a while to get through, and I can't really explain why. We've got Pete and Chuck, they're brothers. Pete doesn't really like Chuck. He's tired of being the one to constantly take care of him, so he kind of spooks him, like pranks him basically by taking him backstage to see Foxy, and Foxy goes like, "Hey, if you want to be a pirate, yeah, I'm talking to you. You're gonna have to lose an eye and an arm." And so they're both kind of like unsettled by that. But then throughout the story, Pete goes through some freak accidents that almost cause him to lose either his eye or his arm. You got like a scalpel falling on him. You got a knife thing. A buzzsaw freaking flies and almost cuts his hand off. A fishing hook. It's messy. And then eventually, he realizes that his brother's trying to help him. They're trying to figure it out together. But he tries to go back to Foxy, see if that can fix anything, and he gets hit by a truck and tragically dies. But he's conscious enough with his soul possessing himself, kind of, to know that he's an organ donor and they're taking him apart and they take his eye and his arm. So, congratulations, Pete, you're a pirate now. Too bad you're dead and can't do anything about it. Now, let's see. Characters, this is pretty good. The main two we have are Pete and Chuck, but we also have the parents who are divorced. That's kind of a common theme in this series. There's a lot of divorces. They're there and they have characters, but I mostly focus on the main cast, and that would be Pete and Chuck. Now, this one, it's because on paper it sounds great. It sounds like a very interesting story, and it definitely has points in the horror department because some of those accidents got me a little tingly, like kind of I don't like this. So that it definitely gets points there. It has insane relevance to FNaF because we actually see Foxy. He's an animatronic. He is present there. And so far, of the three we haven't had any really major appearances of the actual animatronics. Spring Bonnie was there, but he wasn't really Spring Bonnie. As far as the other two, those are like original threats. So we've got Foxy. The story was kind of slow. Like I said, I couldn't really get through it quickly. But overall, I'd say it's going to have another B tier, but it is going to be above Into the Pit. And I may adjust things as I go, because we have a lot of books to go. And you never know, I could rank things a little differently. But that's Step Closer. And as far as easiness to understand, mostly good. The only confusing one so far, Into the Pit. Next up, we've got Bunny Call. This is the one that I've read most recently, obviously because it's the newest book. And this is actually a pretty solid first story for the book. You can't really see it right now, my camera's in the way, but when I move it onto the tier list, you'll be able to see it. Now, this one's about Bob. Bob is a dude with a family who's kind of getting on his nerves. And they're going to a camp, like a summer camp thing. He doesn't really want to go, he's kind of miserable. A good portion of the book is about how he's a little bit miserable. And he goes and he signs up his family as a little bit of revenge for a bunny call, which is a prank where a guy in a rabbit costume, not Spring Bonnie though, it's not going down that road, it's an original character, Ralpho, he's an orange bunny, and I actually do really like that design. It's a very nice design. Basically, a guy comes in a suit, and basically scares you at 5 to 6 a.m. And so Bob signs them up for that. They do that. They go into the cabin, but then he starts to regret it. He's like, "This is my family, and I don't really want to wake them up like this." And he meets a few other people who are also kind of regretting. He meets this guy named Phil, who kind of comes out of nowhere, and they start talking about their lives. And basically Bob goes, "I want to cancel the bunny call." So he waits for Ralpho to show up. Ralpho shows up. He says, "Hey, go away." Ralpho nods. He leaves. But then he comes back and he's trying to break into the house. And at this point, he tries to hit Ralpho, and the rabbit bleeds. So it's like, hold on, maybe this isn't a guy in a suit. So he ends up fending Ralpho off until 6 a.m. And it's revealed later that there was no bunny call person that night. He had overslept. So the bunny Ralpho that Bob was fighting was real, almost. And a quick explanation for that, just my theory, I think it was a manifestation of Bob's anger and guilt, and the fact that it tried to get in. It's basically something created from human emotion, which is a power very strong in this book series, as we're going to see when we get to the Stitch Wraith. Now, as far as story, I think this one is pretty good. I do really like this story. Characters, Bob is a good protagonist. He's got flaws. He's got good points. Horror, very low. Nothing scary happens. It's kind of unsettling if a big orange bunny is trying to break into your house. But other than that, it doesn't have much there. However, the characters and story do carry it. It doesn't have much relevance to FNaF, though. I want to put it in A tier, but I can't, because those things holding it back, the little horror and the low relation to Freddy's, gonna pop that in a high B tier. Yet again, another B tier. Now, that is it for all of the first stories of each book. As you can see, mostly mid-tier stories. And that's kind of what I expected, because they were good. They just weren't great. And that tends to be the trend with most of the first stories of each book. Moving on, we're going to be taking on the second stories. Now, the second stories of each book are usually shorter, and I guess right now I'll sort of explain the pattern that I've noticed. You've got the first book, first story. If I use those interchangeably, I don't really mean to. You got the first story, which is a medium length and serves as sort of an introduction, sort of the hook, if you will, that catches your attention and gets you into the book. Then you've got the second story, which is, it's like a short story, and they tend to be more, I don't know how to describe it. They're shorter, they sort of, I don't want to say filler, because filler makes it sound like a bad thing, but it is kind of filler between the first and third stories, and then the third stories tend to be the big, heavy hitters that tend to be really good. And so moving on to the second stories, I'm just going to tell you right now, they're probably going to rank a little lower on the most part, but not in every case. And that, I'd say, is a good transition into the Pits, To Be Beautiful. Now, To Be Beautiful is about Sarah. She doesn't think she's beautiful. She wants to be beautiful. She finds this Eleanor animatronic, which is kind of like Baby, but weird. And over the course of the book, she slowly gets taken apart and replaced with machinery. However, due to an illusion disc and a bracelet, necklace, locket thing, she appears normal to everyone else and appears more beautiful. And this has a great ending, because Sarah goes and she finds pieces of herself in, like, trash bags, and then Eleanor's like, you shouldn't have seen this, because Sarah had accidentally broken the thing that was keeping her illusion intact. So she's like metal, she's fallen apart. And Eleanor's like, you've fallen right into my trap. And basically shapeshifts into her using the discs, obviously, and takes her place. Meanwhile, Sarah is now in bags and a junk pile on the floor. And that's just how it ends. There's no resolution. Her friends don't find out what happened to her. Her mom doesn't. It is generally a pretty spooky story. So, story, very good. Very, very good story. Characters, Sarah is there, and she's got relatable flaws. However, nothing amazing. Relevance to FNaF, we've got something that resembles Circus Baby, and we have the illusion discs, which does tie it in pretty well. And horror, this is where it gets a lot of points, because the main character finds themselves dead, basically, which is such a good twist. And twists in this series tend to be very nice. Now, let's see, where does this place To Be Beautiful? It's going to be above B tier. Is it going to be above Fetch? And I'm gonna say no, not quite. Fetch is gonna get beaten down the line, but right now it's sitting there like, that's a good story. To Be Beautiful takes its place in A tier though. Very, very nice story.